It is Monday, which means we are now just 24 hours away from opening day for the 2024-25 NHL season, even though opening day has technically already happened because of the Global Series, but the NHL never recognizes the Global Series as their actual opening day. But anyways, before the season gets well underway, I wanted to make sure I got a video out to you guys giving you my standings predictions for each division. This is something that I do every year. I usually don't take it too seriously, so if I predict your favorite team to make the playoffs or finish last place in their division, I don't hate your favorite team, I promise. As always though, I do want to know what you guys are thinking, so be sure to let me know your standings predictions down below in the comments. And with that all being said, let's go ahead and start off with the first division. We're going to start off with the Pacific. I feel like the Pacific is the most predictable division in the NHL heading into this season. Not necessarily, knowing exactly where teams are going to finish 1 through 8, but I feel like there is a pretty sizable gap between the top 4 teams in the Pacific and the bottom 4. First up, finishing last place in the Pacific Division for the second consecutive year, I have the San Jose Sharks. Even though I have them finishing last place in the division, I do feel like Sharks games should be a lot more tolerable this season. Even if you're not a fan of the San Jose Sharks, electric rookies like Will Smith and Macklin Celebrini should be enough to get you to tune into some games. The Sharks also brought in some veterans in the offseason to help make the roster a little bit more competitive. Guys like Jake Wallman and Cody Ceci on the blue line, and they added a legit 30-goal scoring top 6 forward in Tyler Toffoli, who should complement young players like Smith and Celebrini nicely. That all being said though, I do still feel like the San Jose Sharks are quite a ways away from playoff contention. If they don't finish last place in the Pacific, the highest I could see them finishing is 7th, maybe 6th. Next up, finishing 7th place in the Pacific, I have the Calgary Flames. It has been a pretty crazy fall from grace for the Flames over these last few seasons, going from finishing with 111 points in the regular season back in 2021-22 to finishing under 500 and with just 81 points this past season. I'm expecting the Flames to take another sizable step back this season, especially after trading Jacob Markstrom to the New Jersey Devils last season. Despite the fact that the Flames were not a good team in front of him, Jacob Markstrom was among the league leaders in goals saved above expected. I'm a big fan of Dustin Wolf. I think he has an insanely bright future, but I feel like it would be unfair to expect him to fill Jacob Markstrom's shoes in his rookie season. The Flames also traded Andrew Mangiapane to the Washington Capitals in the offseason. I honestly don't think this Flames team, just looking at their roster on paper, is all that far off from being a team in contention for potentially a first overall draft pick. Moving on now, finishing 6th place in the Pacific Division, I have the Anaheim Ducks. This is a team that I feel like has the potential to surprise some people this season. I feel like it's only a matter of time before things start to come together for Anaheim and they take that next step in their rebuild. They have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to young talent. I'm expecting guys like Olin Zellweger and Cutter Gauthier to be 2 of the more impactful rookies in the league this season. I also think we're going to see a much better version of Trevor Zegras than we saw last season. And guys like Pavel Mintyukov, Mason McTavish, Leo Carlsson should only continue to get better. I don't really see them threatening for a playoff spot this season, but I definitely think they're going to improve significantly off of their 59-point finish last season. Moving on now to the 5th seed, I have the Seattle Kraken, who are coming off of a very disappointing season, finishing under 500 with just 81 points, following a season in which they finished with 100 points and knocked off the defending Stanley Cup champions in round 1 of the playoffs. My guess is Seattle is going to level out somewhere in the middle of those last 2 seasons, maybe in the 90 to 92 point range. I'm expecting a bounce back season offensively from Matty Beniers. Very excited to see what Shane Wright is going to be able to do now that he's likely going to be a full-time member of the team this season. He looked really good in the 8 games he played for them last season. The Kraken also brought in some big name free agents like Chandler Stevenson and Brandon Montour. Contracts aside, just talking about the players, those are 2 players that should make this team better. Goaltending has been a bit of a roller coaster from season to season for Seattle since they came into the league, but if Joey Daccord can replicate the success that he had last season, I definitely think this is a team that should be in the wildcard race. Next up, finishing 4th place in the Pacific, I have the Vegas Golden Knights. I really don't know what to expect from this team this season. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they finish as a top 3 seed in the Pacific with 100 plus points, and I also wouldn't be surprised if they completely miss the playoffs. The top end talent is obviously there, but they lost a lot of depth this offseason. Goaltending is also a big question mark for me. Adin Hill has been very good for them, but the most games he's ever played in a single season is 35, and if Adin Hill struggles or gets injured, you then turn to Ilya Samsonov, who was probably one of the worst goalies in the entire league this past season with Toronto. It goes without saying, but I think it's imperative that the Vegas Golden Knights stay relatively healthy this season, because that's a team that has been riddled by injuries over the last few seasons and injuries to key players. If that happens again this season, I really think Vegas is going to struggle, because I just don't think they have the kind of depth to make up for those kind of injuries anymore. Next up, finishing third place in the Pacific for the fourth consecutive season, I have the Los Angeles Kings. The regular season hasn't been a problem for the Kings in recent years. It's been the playoffs where in each of the last 3 postseasons they have ran into Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, and they haven't been able to get over that hump. I will say I would not be surprised to see the Kings take a bit of a step back this season. With the Drew Doughty injury and Matt Roy leaving in free agency, the blue line does not look near as good as it did last season, and they're also really banking on Darcy Kuemper to have a big bounce back season, because he was not good last season for Washington. Moving on now to the 2 seed, I have the Vancouver Canucks. So taking a bit of a step back from last season where they finished first place in the Pacific Division, I think pretty much everybody is expecting a little bit of a regression in terms of the team shooting percentage. The Thatcher Demko injury, him being out 3 to 4 weeks to start the season, hurts them a little bit as well. That all being said though, this is still a very good team, and I think on paper they actually got a little bit better over the course of the offseason. I'm a huge fan of the DeBrusk and Daniel Sprong signings. Maybe they don't finish as a 109-point team again, but I still feel like the Canucks are a shoe-in to make the playoffs, and a shoe-in to make the playoffs as a top 3 seed in the Pacific. And now finally finishing off with the first seed, this shouldn't be a big surprise to anybody. I have the Edmonton Oilers, the runner-ups for the 2024 Stanley Cup. After their miserable first month last season, firing Jay Woodcroft and hiring Chris Knoblauch, the Edmonton Oilers from that point on were one of, if not the best teams in the entire NHL. I think they made some very good moves over the course of the offseason, bringing back Adam Henrique and signing guys like Jeff Skinner and Victor Arvidsson to what I think are bargain deals. In my opinion, on paper, this is the best and most deep forward group that Connor McDavid has ever played with. This is a team that I think is well positioned to make another run at the Stanley Cup in 2025. Moving on now to the Central Division, and finishing 8th place in the Central for the second consecutive year, I have the Chicago Blackhawks. It's similar to what I said about the San Jose Sharks. I think they should be better. They brought in some veterans to help build a more competitive team around Bedard. Guys like Bertuzzi, Teravainen, Ilya Mikheyev, and on the blue line, players like TJ Brody and Alec Martinez. We should see a pretty sizable improvement from the 52 points they finished with last season. Maybe this season they finish in the range of 65 to 70, but even that obviously isn't near enough to get them into the postseason, and it might not even be enough to get them out of 8th place in the Central unless another team in the division really bottoms out. I struggled a bit for seeds 7 through 5. I think these next 3 teams could all be really close together and are kind of in the same group. Finishing 7th, I have the St. Louis Blues, so this would be a pretty sizable step back from this past season where they were in the wildcard hunt right down until the very end of the season. I believe they finished with 92 points. I'm a big fan of Robert Thomas and Jordan Kyrou and Pavel Buchnevich, but those 3 can only do so much. I think outside of those 3, this is a team that could struggle to create offense. When it comes to the defense and goaltending, I mean, the blue line is pretty old. I think St. Louis is really hoping that Philip Broberg can come in and have a big season and kind of breathe some life into that decor. Jordan Binnington was fantastic this past season and was a big reason why St. Louis overachieved a little bit. When you look at his career, he's kind of been inconsistent season to season, so I would be surprised if he's able to have another year like the one that he just had. Moving on now, finishing 6th place in the Central, I have the Minnesota Wild. I think it's going to be more of the same for Minnesota this season. Last season they finished with 87 points. I'm expecting around, 85 to 92, somewhere in that range. I think the Wild have an insanely bright future. In my opinion, they have one of the more underrated prospect pools in the league, but I don't see them becoming a legit contender in the Western Conference until those bio penalties to Zach Parise and Ryan Suter go down from, I think it's like 14 million or something this season to next season it's only around 1.5. That should definitely allow Minnesota to really improve the team, and by then, next season, I think guys like Jesper Wallstedt and Liam Ogren will factor into their plans as well. Next up, finishing 5th place in the Central Division, I have Utah. This is a team that I'm expecting to be in the wildcard race this season. When you just look at their end of the season point total from last season, as the Arizona Coyotes, it was only 77. That's obviously not great, but if you take away that absurd 13 or 14 game losing streak they had last season, they are right there in the thick of it with teams like Minnesota and St. Louis. This is a team that is loaded with young talent. I'm expecting guys like Logan Cooley and Dylan Genther to really pop off this season. The defense should be much better as well. They brought in a legit number 1 in Mikhail Sergachev, a guy that can quarterback the first power play unit, play 24 plus minutes a night, and they also added some more defensive minded guys as well in Ian Cole and John Marino. Even if this team was still in Arizona, I would expect them to take a pretty big step forward this season. Getting into the top 4 now, finishing 4th place, I have the Winnipeg Jets. So a pretty sizable step back from the 110 point season that they just had. I still think they're going to be a really solid team though. The main core is still intact, led by Connor Hellebuck, who is one of, if not the best goaltender in the entire NHL. As long as they have that, they're going to be a very competitive team in the Western Conference. Moving on now to the 3 seed, I have the Colorado Avalanche. I think depth could be a bit of an issue for the Avalanche this season, but the top end talent of McKinnon, Rantanen, and Makar is just so insane that I don't think this team is anywhere close to being in jeopardy of missing the playoffs or anything. Moving on now to the 2 seed, I have the Nashville Predators, who are arguably the most improved team of the offseason after bringing in the likes of Steven Stamkos, Jonathan Marchessault, and Brady Shea in free agency. They already have a superstar forward in Philip Forsberg, a superstar defenseman in Roman Josi, and a superstar goaltender in UC Saros, and I think they've done a really good job of putting a nice supporting cast around those guys. I'm expecting them to build off of the 99-point finish they had last year. And now finally, finishing off with the 1st seed, I have the Dallas Stars, who I think are definitely on paper the best and most well-rounded team in the Central heading into the season. Their blue line did take a bit of a hit over the course of the offseason, losing the likes of Chris Tanev and then signing guys like Dumba and Lyubushkin, which I think were questionable signings at best. But this is still a very deep team. In terms of the offense, all 4 lines are going to be able to score. Guys like Logan Stankoven and Wyatt Johnston are only going to continue to get better, and I also think we're going to see a better version of Jake Ottinger this season than we saw last season, which would be huge for Dallas because, again, I don't think their defense is going to be quite as good as it was last season. Moving on now to the Eastern Conference, I'm going to try and speed things up a little bit here because I didn't even realize we're already over 11 minutes into this. So starting off with the Metro, finishing 8th place, I have the Columbus Blue Jackets. I honestly kind of find it difficult to talk about Columbus because every time they're brought up or they're talked about, all I can think about is, the loss of Johnny Gaudreau. It's going to be difficult for, the Blue Jackets organization this season, in my opinion, to even just focus on playing hockey. Obviously, it's going to be an emotional year. Everyone's going to be playing with heavy hearts. I would love nothing more than to see Columbus go on some magical run, but I really just can't see it happening. They're also going to be without their captain, Boone Jenner, long-term, which was brutal news. Just in terms of the on-ice product, I think it's going to be a pretty rough year for the Blue Jackets, but I don't think anybody's going to fault them for that. Next up, finishing 7th place in the Metro, I have the Pittsburgh Penguins, who last season had their 16-season playoff streak snapped, and now I honestly feel like they're in jeopardy of going on a pretty long streak of missing the playoffs. Obviously, as long as they still have Sidney Crosby playing at such an elite level, it's going to be very difficult for this team to completely bottom out, but I think they're in for a year similar to the one that they just had, maybe finish around 85-ish points or something like that. Next up, finishing 6th place in the Metro, I have the Philadelphia Flyers, who overachieved in my eyes this past season. They were in the thick of the wildcard hunt right up until the very end of the season, and I honestly don't think it's too crazy to believe that we could see the Flyers have another year similar to the one that they just had. John Tortorella has obviously implemented a defensive system that works. Everybody is bought in. We saw that last season. Definitely struggled offensively throughout the majority of the year, but I do think the offense should be better this season, adding someone as creative and skilled as Matvei Michkov. It's a very young team. Jet Luchenko, 18-year-old, actually made the team out of training camp as well, which is cool to see. Moving on now to the 5th seed, another team like Philadelphia that in my eyes overachieved this past season, and they actually ended up squeaking into the playoffs, and I'm expecting them to be in the thick of the wildcard hunt again this season. They are, in my opinion, one of the more improved teams of the offseason, bringing in the likes of Pierre-Luc Dubois, Andrew Mangiapane, Matt Roy, and Jacob Chychrun. Next up, in 4th place, I have the New York Islanders, so a slight step back from last season where they finished 3rd place in the division. We know the defense is probably going to be solid, and they're likely going to get very good goaltending from Ilya Sorokin. As long as the Islanders can just be at least a league average offensive team, which I think they're more than capable of being, they should put themselves in a good position to make the playoffs again. Getting into the top 3 now, I'm just going to rattle these 3 off quickly because I feel like everybody has these 3 teams finishing as the top 3 in whatever order. Carolina, New York, and New Jersey. I have them in that order. Carolina 3rd, the Rangers 2nd, and New Jersey 1st, but honestly, I feel like those 3 teams are interchangeable, and I wouldn't be surprised to see any of them win the Metro Division this season. I would say probably the Rangers and Devils more likely than the Hurricanes. I'm big on the Devils this season. I made a video a month or so ago ranking every team on a tier list heading into the season, and I only had 4 teams in the Stanley Cup contenders tier, and the Devils were one of those teams, and they performed really well and overall just looked great in the Global Series against Buffalo as well, so they're off to a good start. Moving on now to the 4th and final division, we have the Atlantic. Starting off, finishing in 8th place, I have the Montreal Canadiens. This shouldn't be a big surprise to anybody. Montreal is obviously a team that looks to have an insanely bright future, but I do still feel like they're probably a year or two away from being a legit threat to make the playoffs. They obviously had some brutal injury luck during the preseason, which definitely put a damper on a lot of people's expectations for them this season. Moving on now to the 7 seed, I have the Buffalo Sabres, who are kind of behind the 8 ball already, starting off 0-2 after the Global Series. This is a team that just can never seem to put it all together. Last season it was the offense that let them down. The year before that it was the defense and goaltending that let them down. Obviously a ton of young talent on this roster, but it really just feels like they're maybe missing out on a piece or two to really make things click. Moving on now to the 6th seed. This pains me, but I have the Detroit Red Wings. I think a lot of Red Wings fans are in for a rude awakening this season. Last week, I made an entire video as to why I'm a little bit worried about the Red Wings heading into this season. You can go check that out if you have not already. I'm not going to sit here and write them off by any means. Anything can happen, but looking at the roster on paper, I have a hard time seeing them not only take that next step and make the playoffs, but even replicate what they did last season. Moving on now to the 5 seed, I actually have the Tampa Bay Lightning. There's a team in the Atlantic that I have jumping into the playoffs for the first time in a while, so that means a team in the Atlantic has to fall out of the playoffs, and I think that team's going to be Tampa Bay. They already took a bit of a step back this past season. After consistently being a top 3 Atlantic team year after year, they only made the playoffs in a wildcard spot, and that was with Nikita Kucherov having just an otherworldly season, finishing with 100 assists. I wouldn't be surprised if this prediction blows up in my face and Tampa finishes as a top 3 team in the Atlantic. I mean, the core that they have there is still insane, obviously with Vasilevsky, Hedman, Point, Kucherov, and now Jake Gensel, but I'm not sold on the supporting cast, and again, I had a team jumping into the playoffs, so somebody has to fall out, and I do think Tampa Bay has seen their peak and they're now on the decline. Moving on now to the 4 seed, I have the Ottawa Senators, who were the team I was referencing when I said I had a team in the Atlantic jumping back into the postseason for the first time in a while. I'm expecting them to be a much better offensive team this season than they were last season. You look at the forward group that they have, I mean, they're too talented to be, a bottom half of the league team offensively, especially the power play. Their power play was not good last season. I think that's going to get much better. The addition of Linus Ullmark is obviously massive, and it just can't be overstated how important it is bringing in a legit number 1 like that. Jonas Korpisalo, that whole thing didn't work out. He was not good at all for the Senators in his first and only year with the team. You now add a guy who over the last few seasons has been one of the best goaltenders in the entire league. And on the blue line, I think Sanderson is going to take a massive step and really have a breakout season. And although they did get criticized a lot for that Jacob Chychrun trade, I do think Nick Jensen should help them a lot defensively. Getting into the top 3 now, and again, similar to what I did with the Metro, I'm just going to rattle these 3 off because I feel like most people are expecting these 3 teams to be the 3 teams that finish in those top spots. My order is Boston in 3rd, Florida in 2nd, and the Toronto Maple Leafs in 1st. The Bruins obviously made some big additions, bringing in guys like Elias Lindholm and Nikita Zadorov. It's absolutely massive that they finally got Swayman signed as well. I would have been a bit worried about Boston if they had to have Korpisalo as their number 1 for a few months, but that's not going to happen. So I definitely think they're in for another year of being a powerhouse in the Eastern Conference. Florida Panthers, don't really have to do too much explaining there. They're the defending Stanley Cup champions, bringing back pretty much the same core with the exception of Brandon Montour. And when it comes to the Maple Leafs, I mean, the regular season has not been a problem for them. I like a lot of the moves they made over the course of the offseason. I think Chris Tanev is a huge addition for them. Max Pacioretty could end up being a massive steal as well. I would not be surprised at all to see him score 20 goals this season. And when it comes to the goaltending, sure, they may not have a big name, but Joseph Woll and Anthony Stolarz should at least together be a serviceable tandem. Anthony Stolarz was one of the best backups in the league last season. So that is going to wrap up today's video. Those are my complete NHL standings predictions for the 2024-25 NHL season. Again, like I mentioned at the beginning of the video, don't take this too seriously. I don't hate your favorite team if I predicted them to miss the playoffs. I'm just doing this for fun. And as always, I want to know what you guys are thinking. So be sure to let me know what your standings predictions look like down below in the comments. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, I know it was a long one, but if you made it this far, please remember to leave the video a like. It's the best way to let me know that you enjoyed, and it does help out the videos a ton. And most importantly, if this was your first time checking out the channel and you want more NHL content just like this all year round, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and I will talk to you all again soon.